So thank you all again for joining us. So my name is Peter Skopek. I'm the director at WISPIRG, the Wisconsin Public Interest Research Group. We have two great presenters with us today, Caressa Givens from the Wisconsin Bike Fed, and then Greg May with 1,000 Friends of Wisconsin to talk about complete streets and the benefit of more walking and biking in our communities. Just to introduce you all quickly to the Coalition for More Responsible Transportation, CMRT. So many of you are familiar with the coalition because you're members of our coalition, but just wanted to remind you of why we exist and what work we do. So CMRT is a coalition of more than 25 organizations across Wisconsin that come from all different regions of the state, working on lots of different issues, faith organizations, environmental groups, public interest organizations, transportation and transit rider advocates, disability rights advocates, many different organizations working together for a common vision. So I just want to read this out for everyone in case you're not checking out the webinar right now. Our vision, the Coalition for More Responsible Transportation's vision for transportation in Wisconsin is the following. We believe that Wisconsinites deserve an effective, convenient, and clean transportation system that connects everyone to the places they want and need to go. The state's transportation priorities should reflect Wisconsinites' needs and focus on improving quality of life, creating healthier, happier communities, and advancing Wisconsin toward a transportation system that benefits all people in our state. So that is the shared vision that we've agreed to, that our coalition agreed to, and that we're working to advance. What that means, we do a lot of different things. So there's a few pictures up on the screen right now. We have a picture of the coalition getting together, holding a press conference back in 2017 when we successfully stopped the expansion of I-94 in Milwaukee, which would have been detrimental to the community there, drawn resources away from public transportation and other local transportation priorities. We organized educational events. There's another picture up here of the summit that we held, the Transportation Equity Summit in Milwaukee in 2016, where about 300 people came together to talk about what a better transportation system and a fairer transportation system for Wisconsin would look like. Great picture from Wausau on the screen as well, a rally in Wausau that some of our coalition members and Naomi, the interfaith organization there, organized together with the ATU, advocating for more and better bus service in the community. And then we also have a picture of some of the coalition leaders getting together to develop our campaign strategy together for the work that we're going to be doing in the next couple months and years. So just want to say this too, this is the first in a series of webinars. We want to find a way for all of us to continue to get together despite the fact that many of us have to work and advocate and stay at home at the moment to keep our community safe due to COVID-19. We're going to be holding a more or less regular series of webinars on a number of different topics, usually on Thursday evenings. So the upcoming dates and topics that we have are May 28th, how highway expansions undermine public transit, June 18th, about the last mile challenge across Wisconsin. We have a tentative date of July 9th set to talk about transportation and racial justice. So lots of great topics coming up, and we'll make sure to keep you posted about those webinars and the guest speakers that we'll have for those as well. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Greg May with 1,000 Friends of Wisconsin to talk about complete streets.
Hi, everyone. This is Greg May from 1,000 Friends of Wisconsin. We're a transportation and land use organization. And one of the things that we've been advocating for over the years is complete streets, and we thought it would be really valuable, especially in the current age, just to talk about what complete streets are and what they mean for Wisconsin. So jumping in for those who may not be familiar, just kind of an introduction to complete streets. Thinking about the kind of ongoing pandemic, it's incredibly important that we provide safe places for people to walk and bike through our communities. And we're seeing now just how auto-dependent our communities have become, with people driving less and less and people avoiding each other on the crowded sidewalks and paths. It's become really clear that we devote too much of our street infrastructure to vehicles. So complete streets is a movement to kind of counter this phenomenon, attempting to make streets that are safe, comfortable, and convenient for everyone, regardless of age or ability. This is an attempt to get our roadway engineers to kind of change their design approach to consider all modes of travel. So when we talk about complete streets, it can mean a lot of different things, but it's usually infrastructure that enables safe use and supports mobility for all users. This can include, but is not limited to, kind of pedestrian infrastructure like wider sidewalks, ADA-compliant curb ramps, useful street infrastructure, crosswalks, and for bicycle infrastructure, it can include bike lanes and bike parking, signage and wayfinding. Transit improvements can include dedicated busways, and complete streets can also include general improvements like reduced roadway widths and lane widths, and it also includes street trees and landscaping, places that make our streets more inviting for all users. When we were putting together this presentation, we were thinking, why share the road? What are people thinking about in our kind of auto-dependent society, and what are the benefits of complete streets? Well, safety is a major one. Thousands of pedestrians are killed every year in America, and around 60 pedestrians die a year in Wisconsin with over 1,000 injuries. And around a dozen bicyclists die a year in Wisconsin with about 800 plus injuries a year. So we know that slower speeds and complete street infrastructure has been tied to a reduction in injuries for all mode types. Complete streets make our communities safer. And here's a graph kind of explaining this. It's comparing pedestrian and bicycle injuries and deaths between the United States and Europe, where complete street designs are more common. So we'll see orange here is the rate at which cyclists are killed. Blue is when cyclists are injured. Kind of a dark beige is pedestrian deaths, and the lighter beige is pedestrian injuries. And on the very far right, you can see the United States. There's another great benefit to complete streets, which is the public health aspect. We know that public transit users take more steps per day traveling to bus stops than car drivers who live a more sedentary lifestyle. People in well-connected neighborhoods are 50% more likely to meet their daily recommended exercise goals. And kids who walk and bike to school are less likely to be overweight or obese. So complete streets make our communities healthier. When we consider the environmental impact, we know that transportation is the biggest contributor to climate change in the United States. And personal vehicle travel accounts for a huge portion of our transportation emissions. Obviously, walking and biking are zero-emission forms of travel, and public transit is also a lower emission form of travel. Now, considering that 28%, or just over a fourth of all vehicle trips in the United States travel less than 1 mile, that's a distance that can be easily achieved by walking or biking. We can see that there is great potential for emission reductions if we can take even just this 1/4 of our trips and convert them to walking and biking or transit trips. And, that's not even considering longer travel, which could incorporate public transit in a number of ways as well. So complete streets make our environment cleaner. And I also really enjoyed this photo, which kind of shows that street furniture needs to be put in a useful place. It can't just make complete street designs. We have to be more thoughtful about our placement of infrastructure. So another positive outcome, the equity component of complete streets. Complete streets attempt to remove barriers and improve mobility for the elderly and people with disabilities. This photo here was taken by our executive director, Deb. I think really does a great job of highlighting the dangers of a disjointed pedestrian and bicycle network. But getting back to equity, our current infrastructure disproportionately impacts minority groups. This includes the fact that pedestrian deaths are disproportionately experienced by non-white people. Probably now is a good time to remind you that minority groups are also exposed to more vehicle pollution. This graph shows census tracts with the highest exposure to vehicle emissions. The left bar has the least exposure, while the right has the most. And what we can see is that white Americans, which are represented in blue, we can see their percentage of the population decreasing with each step towards more increased exposure, while minority populations end up making up a disproportionate number of residents that are in the most exposed census tracts. So complete streets have the ability to address some of our equity concerns as well. And finally, complete streets are associated with positive economic outcomes. We know from recent studies that more walkable neighborhoods have been tied to increased home values. Complete streets improvements have been tied to improved retail sales and decreased office vacancy. And based on a study that recently came out from Harvard, we know that transportation options are crucial. Kind of how many jobs are available within a 1-hour radius of people, and how well are people connected to those, can be the number one indicator for a family's ability to raise itself out of poverty. So complete streets can make our communities more prosperous as well. That's kind of a lot of the foundation of why 1,000 Friends continues to advocate for complete streets. But what do complete streets look like in Wisconsin, and how are we implementing them? Well, for starters, Wisconsin enacted a complete streets law in 2009. This is at the state level. And this ensured that bike and pedestrian infrastructure was built on all state highway construction projects that received state or federal funds. And the presumption behind this bill was that bike and ped facilities would be built unless they were given an exception. Now, this law was modified in 2015, and it was reworded so that bike and pedestrian infrastructure was given consideration on all state highway projects that receive state or highway funds. And the presumption changed. Now, bike and ped facilities are included only if certain conditions are met. So we went from a system where road engineers were kind of forced to think creatively and outside of the box to incorporate complete streets into their work, to kind of a weaker set of rules where roadway engineers will kind of only consider it in special circumstances. Only if certain conditions are met. We would like to see, at least at 1,000 Friends, a return to the 2009 wording. Now, the state law is kind of complemented by local complete streets ordinances. Previously, with the state laws, that would apply only to roads that receive state and federal funding. But municipalities across Wisconsin have also adopted complete streets requirements, which cover local roadway construction as well. So we can really get the entire gambit if we can get local governments to look at complete street ordinances and then also get the state to return back to the 2009 wording. Now, there still remain other barriers to implementing complete streets in Wisconsin that 1,000 Friends and other people involved in the Coalition for More Responsible Transportation are interested in kind of adopting or fixing, one of which is the lack of eminent domain ability. In 2017, Wisconsin removed the power of eminent domain to build bike lanes or pedestrian paths. So this has outright halted or stopped hundreds of projects around Wisconsin. And another issue is that the state of Wisconsin no longer supports bike and pedestrian infrastructure with state funding. It was slowly reduced until it was fully removed in 2015. So only federal funding is used to fund bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure in Wisconsin. And we'd like to see that changed as well. So if we can get the return of eminent domain power backed by funding from the state and a strengthened complete streets law, we can start to see complete streets infrastructure be built out in Wisconsin. So that's kind of an overview of complete streets in Wisconsin and kind of the current situation and some of the things we're advocating for. Now I'm going to hand it over to Carissa, who's with the Wisconsin Bicycle Federation, to give an overview of some of their work and talk about why sharing the road is important and how we can walk and bike safely in this current kind of pandemic era.
My name is Carissa Givens, and I serve with the Wisconsin Bike Federation. I actually serve in the Milwaukee chapter predominantly, and I also focus on statewide issues as well. So, for instance, right now I am actively working with the city of Milwaukee on complete streets implementation projects and processes, but we're also working collectively throughout the state of Wisconsin on this very important issue of providing more space for people biking and walking during the COVID-19 pandemic. So this image I have on the front, it really explains it quite simply but firmly. Right now, the stance of the Wisconsin Bike Federation that is presented to the public is that our trail counts, especially in large cities, are skyrocketing while miles or vehicular miles traveled are plummeting. So I'm going to go into some challenges that we as an organization are currently facing in terms of trying to advocate for more space and resources for public health. I'm going to talk about some things that we're actively engaged in, some initiatives, and then I'm going to provide some of the next steps and tips for everyone so that they may get involved in their respective communities as individuals. Okay, so I think we have to go to the next slide. Great. So obviously, this is how my brain works. I essentially just wanted to provide you with the challenges that we're facing as an organization. And I want to be very clear that maybe the upside to this is that we're working with a lot of groups across the state, and across the country on basically pure advice on this issue. It's something that you cannot ignore, right? So one of the challenges that we are facing right now is space for physical activity and limited active transportation are limited, and I put limited in quotations because basically we have active transportation advocates, healthcare experts, people who work in environmental justice on a regular basis outside of any type of public health crisis of this magnitude are constantly advocating to free up space for environmental health and public health, right? And even now, today, there are people in our community throughout the country and locally are still finding it very difficult in their pursuit to persuade local government to make decisions about freeing up space for safe social distancing. enforcing stay-at-home laws, no matter what sector you're in or where you're from. It's obvious that right now there's a varying perception of what types of risk we run when we move into the public space. So whether you're an essential worker, whether you have various social or political ideologies, access to information, so access to education and resources, this issue is very complex, and there's no one right or wrong answer in terms of how people get access or how access to public space is perceived. Car culture dominance, it kind of falls into all of this, especially into my first bullet point. Right now, we are seeing municipalities pull back on things like charging for parking or eliminating parking fees altogether. We are still seeing anecdotally reckless driving because there's not as many cars on the street, but what that does is amplify the perception of going faster. And of course, across the country, we're facing various challenges with local governments and even and the state's approval of other things like bike shops that serve people who ride bikes or maybe would like to ride a bike for an essential trip or recreation, debating whether those businesses are essential or non-essential versus an automotive body shop or automotive shop automatically fit within the realm of essential businesses. And of course, media sensation. This is another thing where it's like across the board, no matter what topic it is, there's a lot of articles out there that share information with people, and people kind of get tossed back and forth like rag dolls about what is the right thing to do. I also want to point out I have a map here. This is sourced from the street life data. Again, emphasizing kind of going back to car culture dominance, even though we have around 50 to 80% less vehicle miles traveled in large cities throughout the state of Wisconsin, we're still seeing a dominance or emphasis placed on car culture with things like parking costs, waiving DMV licensing on-street approvals and things of that nature. So those are the challenges that we're facing right now. We go to the next slide. So what is the Bike Federation doing right now? I will say, I have to say, I hope this is funny to some of you, but I was creating this PowerPoint presentation, and after I looked at it, everything is in yellow and black, and it's very urgent. So why I say that is because right now we are actively working towards trying to create more safe spaces, change little things here and there, policies on local and statewide level to ensure that people can move through the public space without depending on a car. Those people who traditionally move through space without a car can still do so for their essential trips comfortably. So it's a little bit of a frenzy right now, but the slides that I've provided for you, the things that Bike Federation's doing right now, are sort of in a timeline from the start to now and are ongoing. So the first thing that kind of hit the radar, like I said before, we wanted to make sure that bicycle shops are considered an essential business, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are required to be open. It means that they can be open and service people, and bicycles are considered legal vehicles of road in the state of Wisconsin, and bicycles are vehicles too, right? They matter too. So on March 22nd, which was my birthday, we sent a letter to the governor's office and the DOT, as well as the Joint Finance Committee, and we urged them to ensure that bicycle shops were considered essential businesses. So no matter how you get around, you must be dignified in the modes that you use. As I believe this PowerPoint presentation will be available to most of you, and you can click through the links, and those links will direct you to we have a virtual database, which is a map database that we partnered with Madison Bikes on, where you can essentially hover over the state of Wisconsin and find pings where all the bike shops are. You can find their standard operating procedures for health and public safety, and you can find what their hours are and all those good things. And that stuff is being updated on a regular basis so that you can find that information all in one spot. Another thing that we wanted to do is we wanted to urge our local leaders on the, at the state and the local level to make sure that they understood that bike share is also an official form of transportation that should be honored. Technically, bike share from a lot of perspectives, especially on the federal level, it's not really considered an official form of transportation. And so often the bike share is cut out of a lot of essential funding that could help cities and towns across the country. But in this case, we advocated with, especially with bubbler bikes here in the city of Milwaukee, to provide information, crowdsource information on our site so that people knew that that business was open, deemed essential, again, so people didn't have to crawl through the nooks and crannies of the web just to find out whether they could get places using public transit, using bike share, and of course getting their bikes repaired or even buying a new bike. So there's one thing that we're doing right now, and like I said, it's ongoing. Next slide, please. So this is the big kahuna. This is something that's kind of like keeping me up at night, but it's super important, and it's called our Streets to Trails campaign. Again, I have links here. If you go to wisconsinbikefed.org, you can find it in our COVID-19 cycling area. But another letter or series of letters we submitted in early to mid-April were urging local leaders and statewide leaders to start creating plans to partially close neighborhood streets and parkways because we were seeing an exponential growth in trail use, especially in Dane County and Milwaukee County. At one time, I think in mid-April, we were seeing close to a 90% increase in trail counts. And if we could open up some streets that would allow people to safely social distance themselves while getting places, or essentially just doing their recreation, their exercise. And what that does would pull some of that recreation off the trails, but still offer areas for all ages and abilities, okay? So we not only requested a formal plan, but we provided what we thought would be efficient, economic, and equitable suggestions. So if you see the letter to the right, we have suggested changes and ideas for immediate action. One of the things that we've been very, very adamant about is ensuring that neighborhoods and cities that aren't close to trail systems are prioritized. And those are areas that are typically home to lower income individuals, Black, Indigenous, persons of color, okay? So that is a very big sticking point. And there are other bullet points on here, like providing looped courses, deactivating the beg buttons so people aren't touching beg buttons, or limiting access to that. And of course, we established a petition. You can't be on your own with your ideas. To date, I believe we're close to about 530 signatures. And I hope, and the petition's still open, by the way, so you're welcome to share that with anyone. And I would say about 200 to 250 of those signatures come from Milwaukee County and the city of Milwaukee. Madison, Wisconsin has already launched their Shared Streets plan. I believe they did that in April, and you can go to the link below and on the PowerPoint, or you can just browse Google from Madison DOT, and you can see their plan. It's very simple, and it also incorporates some closures that deal with projected street projects for the future. So not only are streets close to local traffic only, but some parkway areas, specifically I think Atwood Avenue, is slated for change in the future, and the city of Madison has hopped on that opportunity to really look into what a two-way cycle track or some kind of road diet would do for a project in the future. So I think that that's very clever and very important. Next slide, please. So another thing that we're doing right now as well is we've launched our Safe Routes from Home project. For some of you who have ever heard of Safe Routes to School, the Wisconsin Bike Federation has been working in public school districts for well over a decade, teaching children safe walking and safe biking practices. In the summer, we host bike camps where kids get to ride on street with a couple of instructors. They get to use local trails, go to lakes, splash pads, city parks, you name it, and explore the entire city. They build stamina, and they can go anywhere from a ride around the block to 17 to 20 miles a day, which is really exciting for them. And we mostly work with young people up to the age of around 12, I think like 10 to 12 or 13 for the biking. But obviously our programming this year has been derailed. We are unable to work in the public school district at the moment. So we've had to really whip ourselves into shape and kind of augment some of our programs. So there are some existing challenges. We're sad to say that we're unable to bring back our wonderful Safe Routes to School instructors. I started out at the Wisconsin Bike Federation as a Safe Routes to School instructor, and here I am almost 10 years later. I love that program. And of course, MPS teachers, for example, are just getting back into teaching virtually as of I think maybe a week or two ago. So what we've done is we've put together a virtual program for Walking Wisdom, which is for our younger folks, and then we've put together a junior urbanist program, and it's all virtual, and it's currently available on our website. If you go to thebikefed.org, it's the first thing you see. This is available for teachers, and it's free for families, anyone. It's open and available information. So we obviously want to, over time, now until who knows whatever, we want to encourage people to log on to our lessons and recognize that learning is not just sitting down and reading and writing arithmetic. It's also moving your body, becoming aware of your surroundings, and getting out and moving with your family. You learn a lot of lifelong lessons on a cycle, especially when you're biking maybe in a group. And so we are hoping and crossing our fingers that MPS will approve this program, because right now it is pending of whether they approve it. But there's been a lot of work that's been put into it, and we're crossing our fingers. So there's some really edgy things happening right now. And of course, we're very concerned about equitable access. One of the benefits of our Safe Routes to School program is that we get to be in schools with children who don't always have access to technology. So they get to come along and ride bikes with us no matter what their situation is like at home. So we're also actively working with community organizations, especially in the city of Milwaukee, to be able to provide this information as a printable form that a family could receive maybe in a care package from a community organization if they do not have ready access to the internet. So there's a lot of things that are still very open-ended, and we're kind of going with the flow. And ultimately, we still have to be able to be funded through the school districts and keep this funding rolling with good materials. But at the same time, we're challenged by some of those ongoing barriers that are always existing outside of a pandemic. Next slide. So what's next? I've just listed some things off the top of my head that rush through my head daily and our organization, and that is continue to make connections with local advocates and municipal staff across the state for partial street closure initiatives. Not every small town or medium-sized city or small city is equipped or prepared to do something like this, and yes, even in small cities, overcrowding trails can be an issue, and hitting up some of those neighborhoods that might not be, are further away from a trail could be an important step in terms of ensuring more safe space for safe social distancing. So things like accessing trail counts, connecting with people in the area who can anecdotally tell us that trails are full. Our value to them is our connections to decision makers and our wide network of members at the Wisconsin Bike Federation that can really push those issues up the ladder. Continue to provide support for bike shops. As I said before, we have a living, breathing database that we share with Madison Bikes. So if there's standard operating procedures that change, bike shops that close down, maybe they open up, we want to make sure that we get that information updated on the site. For those partial street closure plans that are active or about to be launched, hint, hint, act as a liaison between residents and city staff. Right now, municipalities are very, very lean. They were lean before, but they're even more lean now. And we are asking them to do something by creating more space on local streets. And so we want to be sure that we can provide support for them to make sure that those partial street closures are going smoothly, people understand etiquette, and if there are any issues that we report them to report them accordingly and equitably. Ensure more children and families have access to our safe routes from home lessons. As I said before, we want to make sure that there's as much access as possible to our lessons because not everybody has the same access to technology. And of course, we want to urge cities to use partial street closure initiatives as an upgraded tool for identifying the feasibility of implementing safe streets improvements like complete streets in perpetuity. So this is really important. This is my big thing, is the presentation before I talked about all these different elements that could make up a complete street. Well, there's a lot of investment and time that gets put into those projects. But more and more cities across the country, and even in Wisconsin, are starting to do soft, rapid implementation projects. They might be more like construction-grade materials that basically strike out a street, and you can reimagine it. What would it be like if we partially closed the street? Would it put a strain on traffic? Would it put a strain on parking or something like that? And if the cities or municipalities can do this work during a public health crisis, why couldn't they do it at any other time? Because I want to remind you that there are many people in our cities and towns, those poor communities and minority communities, that face very similar barriers to accessing the resources that they need. And it's almost tantamount to a pandemic, right? We're all facing that pandemic now, but there are people that have lack of access to jobs, education, healthcare on a regular basis, and they feel that strain and that burden all the time. So what are the tools that we can use that we're using right now during this public health crisis to build a more rapid and operationalized system for things like complete streets projects? And I think that that's all I have. The next slide, I just listed some things that I recommend. If your community has not done yet, or you're thinking, wow, we need to do this, the trails are full, please, please, please reach out to us. All of these things, we find value in what we do and being able to move that information up the ladder and garner value or shared value and consensus. So my very last slide are basically things that you can identify. That's my contact information. That's our new website, which is really awesome. It also has, I'm really excited, it has like a lot of maps of various trails that you can ride throughout the state of Wisconsin that are going to be regularly crowdsourced, which is really cool. But if any of these things really pop out to you that you think that need to change in your respective community, reach out to us. We want to create a groundswell in order to see if we can make those changes. We'll do the best that we can to keep moving along with this. Like I said, we're fully entrenched in this work right now, so if you contact us, we'll probably be able to slip it in somewhere. So that's all I have for you, and I hope that some of this has been beneficial information.
That's great. Thank you very much, Carissa. That's a great presentation. I think that's probably a good point to conclude, and also to again promote our next conversation, our next webinar conversation on May 28th about how highway expansions undermine public transportation and also undermine walking and biking and alternative forms of transportation. So again, that's going to be on May 28th. We'll get that information to you as soon as we can. And with that, I want to say thanks again to everyone who joined us today. Thanks so much, Carissa.